2, 1, and we are recording with the third or fourth time, Mr. Michael Vecchione.
I think
And
it's the
for
fourth by this time.
fourth, fifth, whatever, doesn't matter, a million more. For everybody listening, you are hearing this on Rumble and BitChute and Spotify today, March 1st, 2021. You are not going to be hearing it on YouTube until Sunday, March 7th, 8th, whatever, 6th, because I was suspended from YouTube for a week for discussing election fraud with a CIA veteran of 20 years who apparently is not well versed on the subject, and I am spreading misinformation. And I did not know this. Fun fact, I did not know this. Discussing election fraud is actually hate speech, which I didn't know. But enough about that. And also for everyone listening, I will never stop discussing topics that aren't allowed to be discussed. They will just from now on be on Rumble and BitChute and not on YouTube. But that's enough of that, because today we are not talking about anything related with that. We're talking about a pretty messed up story. And for all the new listeners, Mr. Vecchione, please introduce yourself.
So I'm Michael Vecchione, and I am the retired chief of the Rackets Division in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. I spent 13 years doing that work, and it was some of the best time in my life, quite frankly, in terms of my work life, I should say. There are a lot of other good things in my life, but that was good. I've done a lot of things in terms of working, but that was the best time that I had ever spent. So.
And
Um,
and seemingly, at least for me, the most terrifying time or unsettling time. I want to I won't spoil it for anyone, but I want to read the first the first two paragraphs of the story that we're talking about today, Hand of the Killer, based on true events. Just the first, I won't spoil the rest. Police Sergeant John Carney was too drunk to stand when a highway patrol cop removed him from his car. He had just plowed through a small group of children on their way to school. The group's chaperone, a 25-year-old black pregnant woman, was sprawled dead in the street a few feet away. Her mortally injured 5-year-old son lay at her side. 3 other young children, all critically injured, were scattered in the street like broken dolls. A police sergeant arrived and took custody of Carney. Carney was a short, sickly man, red-veined. The ravages of uncontrolled alcohol abuse marked his face. The sergeant recognized Carney as a sergeant from his own precinct, the 75th. He gently took the drunken driver to an ambulance and ordered a young patrol cop to escort him to the hospital. "Don't let them take his blood," he commanded the younger cop. Which is, I mean, the first paragraph alone was like, oh, okay, so this is setting the stage. This is very dark. It's not the normal, mafia surveillance. It's a guy plows through a group of kids, and it was like, okay. And then it goes one step further, and it's bring him over here. I thought we were gonna get some street justice. I thought the cop was gonna beat the shit out of him or something. Instead, it's come over here. Don't let anybody take his blood. And it's like, okay,
the
this is
blue wall.
this is where we are now. And I was like,
So
okay.
so let me explain to you why we started the story that way. The story, as you well know, because you read it, goes into much, I guess, maybe midway through, into a completely different
Mhm.
set of facts involving the death of a young woman. Um, but what we did was we started the story this way because while that is a true case, it didn't happen exactly that way. We had to change the names and some of the facts for reasons that we felt comfortable. We felt uncomfortable, exposing some of the people who were involved in that case to it in a book. Or in a story. So we changed some of the names. But the fact that a cop did exactly what you have just read is true. His name is different than Carney. He was in a different precinct. But when you continue to read and you find out that he had spent the night in a strip club drinking and then went back, got into his car afterwards, that's all accurate in terms of what actually happened. There was also what is also accurate is maybe not in exactly the way that we wrote it, because it was a little bit more dramatic the way we wrote it, but he was not given a breathalyzer test or a blood test, which was part of the issue with ultimately prosecuting this guy. And I'll jump to the end of that story because that is really not the story that Hand of the Killer is about. but he ultimately gets convicted
Hmm.
and he goes to jail. And I'm not sure what happened to him. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was a very, you know, a really horrible case. I mean, this guy literally spent an entire evening drinking with strippers and drinking to the point where he was just completely without control. And then can you imagine getting behind the wheel of a car and then hitting people and killing them? Because that's what he did.
Uh,
So anyway, I just wanted you to understand that for some, in some instances, for dramatic effect and to make it a little bit more connect, we connect it later on. As you see, we started the story with that story, so it's actually two actual cases that we kind of put together, and we used the case of Carney as kind of the intro into the way that our unfortunate young lady gets killed later on in the short story. So just understand that when
yeah,
I
yeah, and it there's a part of it that it does kind of raise an important question because nothing is as simple as black and white. It's the blue wall. It's nothing. It's all Trump supporters are racist. Everyone on the left is a communist. Like, it's never that easy. As much as we'd
no
like for life to be that easy, it's never that easy. And so, I mean, and like there is a point that is made in the story, and it's yes, he did this. Yes, he was drunk. He was spent all night at a titty bar and was too drunk to even stop for a red light. But that doesn't change like the service he did do for Brooklyn. I listened to one of my favorite podcasts is Lex Friedman, who's just smarter than you and I in his pinky. But he had on a guy the other day, and they were talking about there are certain truths like mathematics, and he's like, there was like a famous mathematician, like a PhD in like the 1900s, who solved some like brilliant theorems. He also murdered his son. That doesn't make his theorem not real. You
that's
know,
true. That's true.
the whoever discovered penicillin, if that guy raped his wife and killed her, that doesn't make the discovery. And it's hard to swallow that pill. It's hard to swallow that pill. But that just kind of made me think like, okay, it's easy for, to say the edgy, it's the blue wall. They're never going to prosecute their own. But then what if you are looking at it from the standpoint of someone in charge and you're like, that is a guy that served and I can't, if I fuck him over, does that set a precedent for everyone else? But that doesn't really concern the rest of the story that we're going to be talking about. But it is a point
Right.
I want to make.
And I just want your readers to or listeners to know that I was never afraid of prosecuting police officers.
Oh, I
Never.
know you weren't. Yeah.
I was in charge of the police department's disciplinary system at one point for a few years, and then when I went to the DA's office, I had a few cases in which I we prosecuted cops.
Yeah. Let's
So
draw
that
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 distinction. Yeah. Sorry. Let's draw
yeah
that distinction. As much as I say that in no way applies to you. You have written books on the number of cops you have taken down, so
yeah
that doesn't apply. Yeah,
and well, of course, Caracappa and Ippolito was right at the top of
those
that, the
motherfuckers.
friends of the family. So the reason, let me give you the beginning of, unless you have a question, I can start with the Hand of the Killer story, and we can go from there if you'd
I, w-
like.
I was gonna bring up something about the hand of the killer, but
Go
that
ahead.
would spoil it. No, that would spoil it. I was gonna say
Okay.
the
Okay.
attention to detail is something that's a mess. That's a lesson
Right.
that can be applied to other aspects of life. But I'll get to that in time.
So what happens in the story is a little different than what happened in real life. When I rejoined the DA's office in 1992, Brooklyn had just gone through a very traumatic period in which there were uncontrolled riots that had happened in the Crown Heights section of the borough, which is a very heavily Hasidic Jewish area, who and a African American and Caribbean American area. So there was always tension in that neighborhood until one day when a rabbi was traveling from one place to another within the confines of that area. His car struck a young African American kid who was on a bicycle and killed him. And was the match that set off the bonfire and then the forest fire that took place later on. There had been tension, and that's what started the riots, because the Black African Americans and the Black Caribbean Americans didn't feel as if there was due investigation and due deference to the kid, and that they thought that the rabbi was going to get off. And none of that was true, because, to tell you the truth, a friend of mine, was assigned to that case, and he was my deputy in the rackets division. And there's a guy who would not allow something like that to happen. But we had days and days of riots in Brooklyn at that time. During those riots, a visiting Jewish scholar from Australia who happened to be walking down the street when he was set upon by a group of African American, Caribbean American people, and he was murdered. His name was Yankel Rosenbaum. So you could imagine how heightened everything was. You had the poor little kid who was killed by the rabbi in his car. Then you had this visiting visitor from Australia who was killed by a mob in Brooklyn. It was chaos. And the I guess it was the detectives, the DA's office, the people who were handling all of these things handled them. I mean, just the way that you would handle them. And there was someone arrested for the killing of this young scholar. There was no one arrested for the accident involving the kid on the bike, because it was just that. It was an accident. And no matter how much some people tried to make it an intentional act, it just wasn't. It was just carelessness and an accident. And the person who was involved in that, the rabbi's driver, was handled, with as a result of it. So but that didn't satisfy the community, and the rioting occurred, and it lasted several days. Mayor Dinkins was the mayor in New York at the time. He appointed then Ray Kelly, who was in the police department, to take charge of the investigation and quell the riots, and ultimately things calmed down. Okay, so that's the background, the true background. And I'll tell you how that leads into the story. What happens is, I now come into the DA's office and I take over the homicide bureau when I first came back. And the case involving the death of the scholar from Australia was assigned to two assistant DAs in my operation, and they handled the case. And they lost the case. They did not win. The individual who was involved with the killing of the scholar from Australia was acquitted. That set off now unrest, to call it that, on the side of the Jewish part of the community. In the midst of all of this, Tommy, a young woman is coming home from shopping on a Friday, late Friday morning. Now, in the book, we have her as the wife of a police officer from the same precinct as the Carney case. So you see, we set up the conflict. In real life, she was a young mother with a young girl who was coming home from shopping. And as she was unloading her car and bringing it into her home, she left the door to her home open. She went down to the car, up the stoop, into her home, bring her bags, go out to get another one, etc. She's attacked. And we find out that a friend of hers, was waiting for her to bring some food for the Sabbath dinner, and she didn't show up. So the neighbor went into her home, or up to her home, and saw the door open, just like we have it in the story, and noticed that this woman was nowhere to be found. She went up the steps, poked her head in the door, and saw her little daughter in the apartment, and went further into the apartment and further down this kind of long corridor or foyer, she saw her friend's body. Um, and this young mother had her pantyhose and panties pulled down around her ankles. She had been stabbed. It was very easy to see. There was blood all over the place. It turns out when the medical examiner looked at her, she was stabbed about 40 times.
Jesus.
And
Didn't
of
say
course,
that in this story.
no, no, we didn't. And she was dead, obviously. Now, what happens is there is no, there are no witnesses at this point. But I go to the scene and I notice when I walk into the corridor or the foyer that above the body is a handprint in blood on the wall. Now, of course, we don't know whose handprint it was. It is. We don't know anything about it. And I'll never forget this. And I'm not sure if we include this in the story. The detectives say to me, well, what do you want us to do about the print? I say, cut the wall out.
Yeah, you cut out the whole section
Right.
of
We
the
cut
drywall.
out the entire piece of wall and I say, voucher it, which means safeguard it and put it in a place, because if we ever find someone, we're going to have to compare the prints on the palm and the prints on the fingers to the bloody palm print in the wall. So the case at that point kind of flounders a bit, because the detectives now have to do their job and they have to kind of fan out into the neighborhood and see what, if anything, they can find out about what happened to this woman. Ultimately, a few days later, they come up with I'll describe her as a kind of a very excitable neighborhood type, gossipy type of woman who says to them, you know something? I was on the street at that time and some guy came up to me and started talking to me. And she describes this. He was a Caribbean American guy, this guy, and she felt very frightened, because keep in mind, the neighborhood is a tinderbox, right? You got everybody
Yeah.
disliking everyone else and not knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah, you said that in this. You said it's a racially mixed neighborhood, which is
Yes,
code for not everyone was best friends with everyone.
that's correct. And when this woman, let me go back a bit to the actual murder scene. When that night, when word started to spread through the neighborhood, there was a demonstration in front of this young woman's house, because there had been rioting, there had been demonstrations, there had been rioting, and now there's this demonstration. After everybody believes it's calmed down, there's now this big demonstration in front of the house. So this crazy, I don't want to say crazy, because she wasn't crazy. She was very excitable.
Yeah,
She
gossipy.
Yeah, she gave the police a very good description. And she said, they asked her, where did you see the guy go after you told him you weren't interested in whatever he was trying to do? She said he walked down towards the house of this young woman who was killed. So that's a pretty good lead. Then now you gotta look around. So what they did then was they looked and went to the houses around the house that this woman lived in. And they go to a street behind the house, because there was sort of an alleyway backyard kind of thing behind this young mother's home. And they noticed that when they went into the kitchen and looked out into the alleyway, they noticed that there was a home right, the back of that home and the back of this home kind of faced one another with this alley in between. So they went and knocked on the door of that place, just on the off chance that, they maybe somebody saw something or heard something. And sure enough, a young guy, African-American guy, says, I did see something. I saw this guy coming out of the kitchen window that morning or that afternoon. And when he saw me, he looked at me and he took off and he went running down the alley and I didn't see him again. So now we had We had a second witness, right? But the big break in the case comes with the police having spread out and having passed the word that anyone who has encountered this or a guy who was seemed to be bothering people on the sidewalks to let them know, right? So they get a call from a woman who says, I think I know who you're talking about. And she tells them that there was this guy who wanted to, who bothered her. And I guess I can say it. What he liked to do was he liked to touch and fondle the asses of these Hasidic women
He
in
would
that neighborhood.
he would go up to women. He'd put their hand around his neck, and he would like to put his hand in their butt or insert a finger into their rectum. It's just
Correct.
some fucking freak.
Yep, absolutely. That's what he was. She had him arrested.
Yeah.
And that was the break because we found who it was. We then pick, at some point, we do a photo lineup, and he gets picked out of the photo lineup by the woman on the street, the woman who had him arrested, and the kid from who saw him coming out of the window. But photo lineups are not the ideal. You want to have a regular lineup. So we set up this lineup, and I'll never forget this because it was comical that night when we had it. They pick up the woman from the street and they bring her in, and I'm there and I say, "Who is this?" He said, "Well, this is," I forgot what her name was, Mrs. Smith, let's call her. I said, "Are you kidding me? That's not her." He goes, "Oh, no, no, it is." She had come into the precinct with a wig on, with different clothes. She had with glasses. She disguised herself because she thought that whoever she was going to view was going to be able to see her, and she was frightened to death. Well, what does she do? She picks him out. That's the guy that bothered me. The guy behind her who saw him coming out the window picks him out. That's who it was. And this woman, of course, knew him. The woman who had him arrested knew him, and there was no problem. So now we had a case. Now let me go back to the scene of the crime for a second. When this young woman was carrying her packages inside the home, and she was with her young daughter. I think the daughter was maybe 2. I don't remember what I said in the story, of 2 or 3, not much more than that. But she used to suck on a pacifier, a baby's pacifier. And the one thing that another friend of this poor woman who was killed came that day to soak up the blood that was left, because in the Jewish religion, everything about the body and blood has to be buried with the body.
Okay.
So her friend came with rags and with cloths and soaked up the blood. And she also noticed that the daughter was not sucking on a pacifier. Now, what had happened just after the woman, her neighbor, found the dead mother on the floor, she went and looked for the daughter, who had been at that point hiding. I know we have it a little different in the book. We have her sitting in the living room, but she had been hiding in the back bedroom. And she did not have the pacifier. So now we had 2 people telling us that a pacifier belonging to this young girl was nowhere to be found. The woman, the day of the murder, no pacifier. The woman who came to clean later on, no pacifier. So, it was a fact that you put in the back of your head, right? So once we get the identifications, we then, I'm sorry, I have it backwards. We got the identifications with the photo identifications first. That's what it was. Now we were satisfied we could pick them up. We had enough to arrest them, but photo identifications are not as reliable as in person, and we were going to hold the lineup that night, but we had to get them first. I'm sorry, I misled your audience. So we found them we found out where he had a relative who lived in the neighborhood, where the relative lived, and the detectives showed up at that house, and they were having some sort of a gathering. I forgot what it was. It was either a christening or some kind of gathering, and there was the defendant sitting on a couch, and he was holding a baby. It was the baby of his cousin or brother, whoever it was having this party. So his name was Raymond LaFond. That's the real name of the killer. When the detectives came in and they said, "We're here for you," he gave the baby to his to someone in the house, and he stood up. And when the detectives patted him down, in his in his pants pocket was a pacifier, a baby's pacifier. Now he was holding a baby,
Yeah.
but he had the pacifier in his pocket. So the detectives called me from the scene, from the scene of the arrest, and they said, "Do you want me to do? What do you want us to do with the pacifier?" I said, "Voucher it," which means seize it, hold it. I said, "You never know." Now I had really not enough evidence at that point to connect the pacifier to everything. And as you know, if you read the story, you know that it becomes
Well,
crucial
yeah,
later on.
that's what I was gonna say is like that's kind of like the lesson I grabbed from it. It's like it's with this podcast, like I edit everything, compress it, but I keep like the original files. I keep all 377 of them. It's like 6 terabytes, 6,000 gigabytes of information. But I keep copies because I never know when I'm gonna need something. And it sounds insane, and it probably is, but I mean, my logic is like I'd rather have it if I ever have to go back and find something for whatever reason. And here you go, is
Yep.
grab the pacifier. Why? Just get it all. Let's just be safe. Little do they know that that's the nail in the coffin.
Right. And you know, the thing is that it really was, and I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but it was experience. I mean, a DA
Yeah.
gave me this case because we had lost the other case. And now we have another case in that same neighborhood in which both communities are up in arms. And he didn't want to suffer yet another, defeat because quite frankly, in the first case, the person should have been convicted. It was just
Mhm.
a bad situation. And this time he didn't want it to go that route. He wanted to make sure justice was done, but do it in a way that the killer would be found guilty. So he gave me the case. I had it, and fortunately, I was able to. The detectives called me because God knows what they would have done with that pacifier. They probably would have thrown it on the couch where the guy was sitting and thinking it was the babies that he was holding, right? So we get to we now comes the lineup and we bring all these people in and everybody identifies him. And he makes a statement, which was basically, I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do it. So, so we were off to the races. That was it. We had three witnesses. And the reason I meant neglected to say this, the reason that the kid in the other home behind this one was looking out the window is that when LaFond came out the window, the kid's dog started to bark, who was in the yard. So that kind of brought him to the window, and he saw LaFond coming out of the window. So we were very fortunate with that. So we had three pretty good witnesses. We had, the bloody handprint, which of course, when he was arrested that night or before he was arrested, we took his palm print and compared it to the bloody print that I told them to cut the wall out. So we had it, and they compared it, and it was a match. It was him. So I had the bloody palm print. I had the woman on the street. I had the kid behind. I had the other woman. Good case, right?
Yeah.
I was very pleased. So I remember this again as if it was yesterday. We're in court. It wasn't the first time it was on the calendar because that would be the arraignment. It may have been the first time the case was on before the judge who was going to be the trial judge. So I asked him, I'm now thinking that, listen, I got this blood if I get his DNA in that bloody, palm print, which I'm sure is the woman's blood, but if his DNA is in there, then he could say whatever he wants to say, but I got him, right? So the judge agrees, orders him to give us a DNA sample. And sure enough, he does. And when I get called by the medical examiner's office and they tell me what the result was, I almost fell off my chair. They said his DNA is not there. Someone else's DNA is there. Of course, the woman's DNA is on the blood,
Well,
is
yeah.
because it's our blood.
Yeah.
But someone else's DNA is there. So I couldn't believe what I had done. I had taken a case that was virtually indefensible and given the defense attorney a defense.
You had the extra point and you decided to go for 2 points.
Correct.
And it was why? Why did I do that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I won't tell you right now, but I'll tell you. Remind me to mention it to you. I did this one other time too, and so now I turn. Of course, I turn this over. It's exculpatory information. You got to turn it over, and I did. The defense attorney was a guy that I know. I'd known him for years, and he kind of looked at me and outside the presence of his client said, "Thanks, thanks," because I had now given him something to argue. He had no way to argue this. So now I had to figure out a way out. How am I going to handle this? So I was pretty good friends with the head serologist. He's the guy that examines blood
Mm-hmm.
in the medical examiner's office. I had known him for several years. In fact, he was one of the guys that was a pioneer in DNA and DNA testimony and DNA evidence and trials.
Okay.
I remember years before when I was in the DA's office the first time, I had done a case um, in which it happened to be a Jewish victim as well, and he what kind of convicted the defendant in that case was a bloody T-shirt that had been discovered in this guy's social club. And when they took it into the precinct, the medical examiner's office was just at the early stages of the DNA analysis. And and this guy, Robert Shaler is his name, told me that we had the right guy. I said, how do you know that? He said, well, from his blood. I said, what do you mean from his blood? And you can match the type? He said, no. He said, we have this new thing now. And that's how I would describe it, this new thing, because no one knew what DNA was. And I said, well, how can you be so sure? He said, I can tell you that the characteristics of this blood on this guy's shirt is in the population of, and of course we had the dead guy's blood, right? And he said, that match is like his blood is in like the match is sort of in 1/1 millionth of the population. You can narrow it down that much that the blood on the shirt and the blood in the dead guy are the same based on these characteristics that are in the blood. Now, Tommy, now I know it's DNA. I didn't know what he was talking about at the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It was new science at the time.
Yes.
It was
So
space age.
it was great. So now
Do
I
you still
want
know? Do you still know him?
yeah, I still know. I'm not sure if he's at the DA's office any longer, but I mean at the medical examiner's office any longer.
You
And I
think
know
you
what you're
could?
gonna
You
ask.
think
You
you
think
could
you
get
can
him
get him
from me?
on?
You think you could get him from
Well,
me?
I promise you I will try.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Noted. All right. Continue.
So now I had, Robert Shaler, Dr. Shaler in my head, and I said, he's the guy I got to call. So I ask him to come to my office, and he comes in one afternoon, and I lay out this whole thing about the blood and the handprint and another person's DNA in the handprint. So he says to me, Mike, that's not specific enough. Tell me everything about the crime scene as it was discovered and other things, whatever is not there too. There are some things that may not. So we go through the entire scene that I saw, that the detective saw, that the crime scene unit saw, everything. And then I talk to him about, and I say, about the little girl and the pacifier. He says, tell me about the pacifier. So I tell him that this little girl was, I guess, I don't want to use the word addicted, but
Yeah.
she was connected to that pacifier and had it all the time. And I said, it's nowhere to be found. And I said, listen, but there is a pacifier that we found on LaFon's person in his pants. I don't know, if it's her pacifier. I don't know whose pacifier it is. I don't know, but we have it. So he said, you got to find out one thing for me, and then I'll tell you what we'll do. I said, okay. Tells me I need to find out if the little girl had a cold or had a runny nose or something of that nature. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I call him. I call him her friend, the mother's friend who cleaned up the place. I call the other neighbor and the little girl's father. And all of them tell me that yes, she had a cold. In fact, her mother was concerned. She had taken her to the doctor. She had a runny nose, and she was not feeling well. I said, okay. So I call back Dr. Shaler, and he says to me, here's what we're going to do. Tell the father that we want him and the little girl to come into the ME's office, and we're going to take the father's blood because, Mike, defense attorneys always blame the husband first. So
Yeah.
we have to eliminate him
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, though, right? You gotta make sure.
without a doubt, without a doubt. And then we'll take the little girl's blood. So I said, okay, I'll do that. Let's see what happens. He said, make sure you don't get rid of the pacifier, however. I said, no, no, no. It's all secure. It's no problem. So I would say about 3 or 4 days later, we get the result. And he tells me, first of all, that they both came in, took blood, and that he rushed to do the DNA analysis of the blood of the little girl and of the husband. He said the husband, Mike, eliminated. His DNA is not that unknown DNA in the palm print. Of course, I was happy about that because that would have really thrown a monkey wrench into this. He says, but the little girl, it's her DNA. It's mixed in with this guy's, her mother's blood in this guy's palm print, which we know is his palm print. I said, Doc, what are you talking? How is that possible? He said, didn't you tell me she had a pacifier? I said, yes. So how about this scenario? Because you know that the little girl was hiding in the back room, right? He said, so he comes in, he's going to kill her mother. He takes the pacifier out of her mouth, puts it into his pocket. She runs into the back room, and he does his dirty deed on the mother, right? He touches the pacifier, which had her snots and her mucus and stuff on it, and then kills the mother, puts his hand on the wall, and now the DNA from the pacifier is transferred from his hand onto the wall in the blood.
What was there any? Sorry to interrupt, but did they ever figure out why he took the pacifier? Like, clearly he's a piece of shit, but he wasn't a true demon. He didn't harm the child. Is there a
No,
reason? Was it just
no.
adrenaline?
Yeah, we do think that that was the case, that he just did it. Look,
Fog of
when I
war.
thought of the same thing, Tommy, I have to tell you, I said, man, we're gonna have to sell this to a jury. But think about it. Days later, he had the pacifier in his pocket,
Yeah.
or a pacifier, because I don't want to give away what happens next. He had a pacifier in his pocket. What is a grown man doing with a pacifier in his pocket, right? So now we have the scenario. And I said to the doctor, Dr. Shaler, are you prepared to testify to that hypothetical that you just gave me? He said, absolutely. There's no problem. And if I can't do it, the serologist who actually did the work will testify to that, because that is it's a scientific certainty. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. that little girl's DNA is on that wall. I said, okay. He said, now I know, because I've been around the block a few times. I have to identify the pacifier that was in his pocket as the little girl's pacifier, because that now closes the door on any possibility, right? So what do? I bring the father into the office and I sit him down and I say to him, because he knew that there was a problem, because I had kept him apprised of all of this. I sit him down and I don't say anything to him. I don't tell him why he's there, what he's about to do. And I say, I have to ask you a question. Your daughter is missing a pacifier. Is that correct? He goes, yeah. How did you know? He said, her favorite pacifier. I have not been able to find it. I've searched everywhere for it. It's not in my home. I have no idea. And she was crying for it at one point. I said, okay, well, I'm going to show you something. And I'm not going to say anything to you about it. I just want you to tell me what your first reaction is when I show you this. So I have a detective come in, opens up the evidence envelope, and we put the pacifier on my desk. Without me saying a word, he said, where did you find it? That's my daughter's pacifier. I said, how do you know? He said, trust me. I know that that's my daughter's pacifier. That's exactly the one. I've seen it 1,000 times. That's the kid's pacifier. I said, would you be willing to testify to that in court? I don't tell him why this is important.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, absolutely. I would absolutely testify it. That's my daughter's pacifier, and no one can tell me otherwise. So now I've got the door closed. And now all I have to do is convince a jury that all of these little bits and pieces kind of fit together. And we were able to do it. The defense attorney, when I brought in, because I had to give him notice of what I was going to say with regard to the DNA analysis and the analysis of the blood and all this other stuff, the new analysis, the same guy who said to me, thanks before, said to me under his breath, you motherfucker.
Well, I guess that's good though. That means you got him, right?
Oh, it was a good thing. It was a very good thing. It was a very good thing. So we tried the case, and everybody who was involved, the kid who was in the window with the dog. A funny part about that is I had, I read the detective's report about the dog and about the kid, and then saw him later on at the lineup, but I had never gone to his house. So I had never seen, so during the preparation for the trial, I went to his house with some of my detectives, the guys that worked for us in the DA's office. And we approached the fence. The house was fenced in. We approach it, and this dog comes out at somewhere, barking at us, going crazy. My detective friend says to me, we got the right house. This is the place.
Yeah.
And so that also verified the story to us about how the dog alerted the kid to someone coming out the window. So, when you think about it, Tom, when you have somebody totally independent, this is a guy who didn't even know who lived in that house. He didn't know anybody who lived over. He didn't have any connection to this unfortunate woman who was killed. And he was of the same race as the defendant. So it was not as if I had some guy testifying, in the case. He was terrific. He held up on the stand, and think about it. How could anybody shake him? What could a defense attorney do?
Yeah, what was
all I'm telling you is what I saw. And I saw that guy come out of that house is, the kitchen window. So
yeah, there's no gain for him. Like
no,
what was Zhang, it's not Dick Cheney, former CEO of Halliburton, really pushing for us to invade Iraq, where it's like, there might be a little connection. This is a guy. It's just like, this is what I saw. I just leave me alone.
That was it. So when you look at the first page of the story, and it's how a bloody handprint and a baby's pacifier, caught a killer. And it literally was the pacifier. Well, of course, when the father testified, now I'm setting this entire thing up, right? All of this testimony is leading to the father coming in. And when I take out that pacifier and do the same thing I did in the DA's in my office, I said, what do you see? That my daughter's pacifier, without a doubt, without a doubt. And he couldn't be shaken at all, Tom, on cross-examination, not at all. He was a rock, in terms of this stuff. And I mean, when you think about it, his entire family and his entire life was uprooted by
Yeah.
some guy who was, just an animal, really. I mean, what he did to his wife is incredible. Imagine how do you inflict 40 stab wounds on somebody?
There's
It
no
was
there's
horrible.
no yeah, there's no, you know, maybe domestic, you know, families getting a divorce from the wife was unfaithful and a guy loses his temper and
No,
smacks her. It's a dude that followed her in, pulled her panties down, and then stabbed her to death 40
yeah,
times into
and
the
did
pacifier of a child.
yeah, and when you think about what he had done to these other women in terms of, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, that
grabbing them
whole
from
part too.
behind, and yeah,
Yeah, his whole criminal history of doing it.
that was his thing.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I've been doing this for a long time, and when that woman who had him arrested told us what he was, what he was, his proclivity was, and she told me, she said, Mr. Vecchione, I got to tell you that I know other people who he's done it to. They're just too afraid to come forward.
Mhm.
But she, that shocked me. I have to tell you
Mhm.
that, there's a lot of perverts in this world, but that one and it was a specific religion. I mean, the women were of a specific religion and a specific sect within the religion that he would do it to, that he did it to, which is,
If it wasn't so tragic, it would almost be comical. Like, if it wasn't so and I have to say that very generally, but it's like,
yeah,
if it wasn't so tragic, it would almost be comical because it's not even like, "What's your type?" "Oh, I like girls with short brunette hair." No, I like Hasidic women, and I specifically like to put my finger in their asshole.
yeah, it was a really bad
It's
situation.
and again,
And
it's not to make light of it. It's but it's trying to, I guess, paint, like, a general light on it, like,
yeah,
what a
and
weird thing.
yes, and he would do it on the street too. That's
That's
the other thing. He would do it on the
that's
street. So
and hey, man, if that's something you wanna do, like, with consenting adults, hey, more power to you. I'm not knocking that. I mean, I'm not gonna tell anyone their fetish is weird. Knock yourself out.
right.
Not when it's sexual assault and then murder, and
It
then
was
stealing
a
a pacifier from a child.
yep. The thing is that the other part of this that was new to me, and I had done a lot of trials by that point, but I had never had a palm print as part of the evidence. This was new. I had fingerprints, of course, but never a palm print. And when the detectives came in, the experts came into the precinct that night that he was arrested and took his palm print. I watched them. I watched how they inked it, and how they put it on the paper, and made sure that they had it done right. And we had to make sure we had it done right, because think of it, we were going to compare that to basically a bloody print that was found on a wall made out of what's the word I'm looking for? Not
Drywall?
not concrete.
Stuck
Yeah, it was sort of drywall-ish. Yeah,
stucco?
yeah, not no 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 not stucco. It was flat. It was flat. But in any event, it was not the ideal surface for, for reading prints and reading that kind of stuff. But these guys are terrific. The guys that do that are terrific. And I had some experience with fingerprints before, because I had done cases with fingerprints, but I had never had a palm print, before. And it is unique. There are aspects of your palm,
Mhm.
the ridges and things of your on your skin that that make it a unique to each individual. So that was a learning experience. I have to tell you that it was really a very very interesting case, but it was one that I had a lot of pressure, because because we lost that other big case and things were still bubbling up. And,
Yeah.
it was, the DA was like, the DA is a politician,
Yeah.
he needs votes out of that community. So, you don't want to have women killed or, people killed and not at least have somebody who's responsible for it pay the price.
Yeah.
So he was very, very, very much interested. I mean, he would call me during the trial all the time. How's it going? What's going on? How's it going? Now, I had just been back to the DA's office. I didn't really know him that well at that point. When I was in the DA's office, my first stint, he was in charge of the rackets division, and I had not spent any time in rackets at that point in my career, so I didn't really have much contact with him. Um, and when I got hired again, it was people who I had worked with for my first stint who now came to work again at the DA's office who told him about me, and that's why he hired me. He needed someone to do trials and to do these kind of publicity trials because I had been doing trials, outside my career. When I say outside, I'm talking about defense trials. So so there was a lot of pressure. In fact, I had one guy that I knew went to grammar school with him. He was a detective in the office. When he saw me after the verdict, he came up to me, gave me this big hug, and said, "It's good that a guy from the neighborhood saved our asses." So that was
Fuck
that was
yeah.
kind of the best thing that ever happened. One of those moments that you don't forget.
Yeah.
So
I
uh,
I was gonna say kind of an odd side note. Just got my brain turning. With fingerprints and with handprints, they're actually finding that with with your voice. Granted, it's not like a recording of a walkie-talkie, but like your voice just on a phone call is about 100 times more unique than your fingerprint. It has like an auditory signature, which is very weird to think about because when we think about things like X key score, or not X key score, echelon or stellar winds, the things that Snowden exposed, for
yeah,
better or worse. I'm not even going into but you have your opinion on him. I don't care. But the fact that there is a dragnet surveillance program for America and the world that started post 9/11 is just record every phone call. And now we have things like, right? We have things like Alexa, which there are already
yeah,
mass lawsuits
yeah.
against Amazon. And on a side note, Amazon's development program for Alexa got a $600 million stipend from the CIA during development. But the mass, let's not even go into conspiracies. Let's just go what we know. The mass surveillance dragnet of the National Security Agency, picking up everyone's voice all the time. And then we think about something like the pacifier, where you don't know what piece of evidence you'll need. You can kind of see that, again, I'm not even arguing for or against it, just stating objective facts. You now have everyone's voice at every phone call, at every time, stored in somewhere. You never know what voice you're gonna need. And no, I wasn't there. I didn't kill him. And then they find that actually your voice was picked up on a cell phone recording of a party in Toronto. You
Yeah.
were in Toronto, Mr. Kerrigan. You weren't in Ocean City. And it's like, oh fuck. And but they can go back 11 years and find that.
Well, the only problem is that, not problem, but the only kind of fly in the ointment there is that you've got to hope that you get it from them. A lot of times when the government has things that you want or can use, you don't
Not,
necessarily, they're not as forthcoming with
well, they don't want to
even law enforcement,
yeah.
and particularly state. They looked down at us, the
Yeah.
federal law
Oh,
enforcement
oh
people.
yeah,
So
no, because the act of giving information then reveals their information gathering technique, which itself
yeah,
is classified. And no, I'm not. I'm staying apolitical on it, but I mean, no, my opinion is that's horrible because in this case, it's good, right? Trying to find a killer, guy, pacifier. What happens when the NSA turns into a political tool and all of a sudden it's, hey, you see that guy Tommy, and I don't like what he's saying about X, Y, and Z. Can we just wind back the clocks and, oh, 2012, he was in Athens, Georgia, and he said something, ooh, that was a little misogynistic. It would really suck if we leaked that online. Now he's a podcast. And it's like, that's a dangerous thing because,
yeah,
yes,
it is.
not only can you can't get what you want, it's a tool to be used. Oh, Mr. Vecchione, oh, we don't like this thing. Oh, well, 22 years ago, ooh, did you know that you said the N word on a phone call? And he didn't, for all the listeners, he didn't. But Oh, you said that. Oh, well, that might not. Ooh, Mr. Joe Rogan. I don't like you interviewing Bernie Sanders. Did you know Joe Rogan said this 11 years ago? And it's that man. That is a dangerous tool.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Look,
yeah.
you could abuse anything that is supposed to be used for the good, and
Well, yeah.
if that happens, then we're in a lot of trouble. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's
It's
face it.
well, I mean, it's the
So
same. What is a butter knife used for? Is it used for toast, or is it used for murder? And it's hey man, and and then now we're just spiraling off into the weeds, but I mean, what does that program use? Do you prevent a 9/11? Right after 9/11, when you're watching people jump to their deaths and burn to death, and you watch 210-story buildings collapse, you see a lot of people saying, all right, fuck the rules, let's start surveilling everyone. But then 20 years go by and you start going, is this a political tool? Is this a so it all comes down to as soon as a tragedy happens, we're all like, "Get rid of the Constitution. Let's go
yeah,
get everyone." But then enough
exactly.
time passes, and it's
And that's not what the founding fathers wanted at all.
no,
So
no, it's
but I just want to make sure that your listeners know the reason why, if you get the story, and again, an unabashed plug, it's 99 cents
yeah,
on
no, it's
on
yeah, yeah, no,
on
plug
Kindle.
it. It's 99
And
cents. Go grab it. It's a
when you
terrible
read
read.
it, you won't find the references to the Hasidic Jewish woman. We didn't. First of all, her family is still around, and both my writing partner and I wanted to make this as kind of as anonymous without using that word exactly the right way as we could. But we wanted the story is there, and you read it, so you know that I'm telling you the story in the way it happened, but the story is basically the same as what's in Hand of the Killer. So
Yeah,
um, it's a and so now the link or the kind of hook that we used, because the woman in Hand of the Killer that's killed is the wife of a cop,
yeah,
and the thought is that she was killed in revenge for what Carney had done.
yeah,
So in our case, the real case, that woman was a Hasidic woman, and it was thought at that time that she was killed because of to revenge for the little boy who was killed on his bike. So that's how we kind of
well,
linked the
yeah,
two things together.
well, you have to do that. You can't go through and I mean, that's not fair to people who are still alive and who are still.
No, no,
You
no.
can't do that at all. Yeah,
Look,
yeah, it's this podcast. I make up names for friends that I have. I don't
yeah,
say, hey,
you'll
yeah,
you'll see. Well, I know that you're going to get this because I know that you're now a fan of the books. But when you get the new one, "Homicide is My Business" is the name of it, and it's about the Sicilian hitman. We changed names in that, of course, because first of all, people are informants who are giving information. There's
yeah,
no way we're going to give names out, that way. And there are other names that we just use that were nowhere close to the names of the real person. It's the only way to do this, even in a book that is totally based on fact.
yeah.
So or is fact, I should say, not based on
Not
fact,
based on
but is
fact
fact. Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
fact.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
For
um,
for all the new listeners, because we have had a recent bump in them. Mr.
but
Vecchio and
that's good to know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's I will continue to fight this goddamn censorship to the end of time. But you are the author of two other books, and we've discussed this. You can go back on the podcast and find them. I can't recall which episodes they were, but Crooked Brooklyn and Friends of the Family, both of which Crooked Brooklyn is more eye-opening. Friends of the Family is outright terrifying. But those are both available. Well, Friends of the Family, no, Friends of the Family isn't on Crooked Brooklyn's on Audible. Friends of the Family is not, but you can get your phone to read it to you if it's on Kindle. Both
Yeah.
of those are. I'll put those in the description and sticky them in the top comment. Those are good books, and as I always say to everyone that listens to this podcast, this is a one-man show. I get to have on whoever I want. I don't have on anybody that I don't want to have on, and I don't plug books that I don't enjoy. There are a lot of books I read and I go, I'm not going to have that guy on. That book sucked. I only have on guests that I like. I only plug books that I enjoy. I have yet to plug a bad book. Those are enjoyable books. If this is your cup of tea, this is something you're interested in, go grab them. They're terrifying, but they're true. And we got the guy right here.
Yeah, and you got the next one. I know that you've invited me back to do the other short story,
Uh-huh.
"Murder on the Bridge." That's also a pretty. I don't know if you've read it yet, but it's also it's a terrifying story in another way, but it also has a really kind of twisty ending as to how we actually how we actually got the guy. And it's good because the person, and I'll just give you a little taste. He, in my opinion, was at the time and still is the personification of Satan come to Brooklyn. He was
Jesus.
such a bad guy. I mean, such a bad guy that that it was he deserved every single day that he spends in jail. This guy, every single day, and you know, and it's you'll understand what I'm talking about in terms of the way that we got him. It was almost by accident, I have to say, you know. So it's interesting. So we'll talk about it
Cool. Yeah,
the next time.
I'll text you and we'll put together that
It's
episode.
also on Amazon as a Kindle single too.
Okay, okay, yeah, I'll find the links because you sent me the document, but I don't have a link for it. So I'll put in the link for Hand of the Killer, and then we'll do Murder on the Bridge next time.
Right.
I was gonna say, just kind of as a side note, yeah, there's kind of this like this interesting. You're right. There's the Saint Augustine quote. Truth is like a lion; it does not need to be defended. It just needs to be let out of the cage. It will fend for itself. And then there's another quote. I don't remember who it's from. But I heard, oddly enough, I heard it on a lecture about the Apollo missions. But it's truth is like truth is a perfect fabric. It can't be cut. It's seamless. There's no missing pieces. All you can do is cover it up, but you can never destroy it. And you kind of see that coming through. You know, it's like mathematics. Like the sun could explode, everyone on Earth could die, all remnants of civilization could disappear, and then life could evolve on some other star system in a billion years. They would still discover the structure of the atom, that 1 + 1 is 2. There are certain things that it's like they will get uncovered no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of see that with this case is it's like the truth, it exists in space time, the event that happened, and it's almost kind of like an archaeological dig. You kind of just you're brushing off things, and you find the guy with the dog, you find the woman with the babushka and the glasses, and you find the pacifier and the handprint, and it's this whole thing. You kind of just uncover it, and it's like, oh, it's you really can't hide it. It might take time, but you uncover all the pieces and then just plug them all together, and boom, there's your guy.
Look, when you're correct, I thank you for that. It was exactly the way we did this. But when it first happened, it was a shock to the people in the neighborhood because this was not someone who was a political type woman who was out in the streets, you know, protesting. There was no rhyme or reason connected to the uprisings or the unrest in that community that led to her. So while people all speculated, you know, and that is what happens in these situations, that, oh, this must be revenge for what happened to the little kid on the bike. That was not the case at all. This guy was just a pervert, a pervert. Now, why he decided at this point to escalate his perversion from, you know, the finger in the butt to 40
Murder.
stab wounds, I don't have any answer for that. I don't know. But I remember how that neighborhood reacted when this happened, and she was it was a shock. I mean, a total shock because she was a total innocent. I mean, just someone who was not connected to anything other than raising her family and taking care of her husband, you know, and that was it. And those are ones that you know you are that drive you to make sure you do the right thing and get the right evidence and put the right guy behind bars, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it worked out well. It worked
Yeah.
out well for us.
Hell yeah. Well, Mr. Vecchione, let's wrap this one up. And
Okay.
I'll put the links in the description and in the comments. And I'll text you and we'll set up the next one. And as always, thank you very much for coming on. And
Thank you for having me, Tom.
of
I
course,
appreciate it.
absolutely. You're an enjoyable guy to talk. Yeah, again, I don't invite people back on that I don't want to. There is no formalities here. If I don't want someone back on, I'll just ignore them. I don't give a
Well,
shit. So
thanks.
I have you back on because I like talking to you, man. You're a cool guy. So
Okay.
we'll wrap this up. But yeah, thank you very much. And I'll text you. We'll set up the next one. All right.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, my man. I'll see you.